Stanford University.
Okay, thanks everyone for coming. So my name is Lisa Wallace, and I'm editor-in-chief at the Stanford Review, which is an independent conservative and libertarian newspaper at Stanford University. One of the things that we do for campus outreach, specifically undergraduate campus outreach, is host Hoover lunches through the Hoover Institution, where we invite a Hoover fellow to come speak with us about a specific topic. So today we have Tammy Frisby, who's a Hoover fellow, a research fellow at the Hoover Institution. Her primary research interests are public policy making and American national politics. She's been a Hoover Fellow since 2009 and is currently working on 2 book projects, as well as helping spearhead a site called Advancing a Free Society, which is a website that provides national political analysis at the Hoover Institution. Before coming to the Hoover Institution in 2009, she was the executive director of the Bill Lane Center for the American West, also at Stanford University, and she received her PhD in government from Harvard University. So without further ado, let's give it up for Tammy.
Thanks, Lisa. Thank you, Lisa. It's nice to see so many familiar faces here. I recognize a number of you from class. It's good to see you again, and to see some new faces, so I look forward to getting to know you. They asked me to come in today and talk about polling in the election, and so I'll make some comments about that, and then happy to take questions from you, and apparently people out on the web listening and watching the live stream. And those questions I welcome about polling and survey research and the election, or other topics related to the election as well. We might as well use our time today to talk about the things that are at the front of your minds, right, related to American politics and policymaking. I don't need the mic. Oh, I have the lapel. Right, thank you. Yeah. So let's start out by talking about polling and the approach that I would encourage you to take when you're looking at the avalanche of polling data that's coming at us about the election right now. I'd encourage you to look at what we refer to as polls of polls, so poll averages. And one of the most well-known and well-respected, a number of my senior colleagues here at Hoover also rely on the Real Clear Politics moving average of the polls out there to see where we are in the polling anyway on the state of the election. So this is a snapshot. You can find this yourself on the web of the Real Clear Politics general election head-to-head matchup between Romney and Obama. And as of today, Real Clear has the average with Romney up 0.4%. So well within the margin of error. We are at a statistical tie according to the polls right now in the race. When you're looking at individual polls, because of course you're going to be assaulted by these all the time, and the statistician Nate Silver, who runs the blog 538 on the New York Times website, I would guess a number of you check out Nate Silver's work. He tweeted out a couple of weeks ago that it would be a great service to society, basically, if people would stop tweeting out individual poll results, because what we really want to be doing is looking at these averages. Because when you look at individual poll results, there are a couple of things you need to keep in mind. First of all, you need to keep in mind that we have uncertainty, uncertainty, uncertainty when we're looking at any individual poll. Because you have, first of all, the margin of error. Okay? Any poll has a margin of error, and in a sample in which you have 1,000 nationally representative Americans, or a sample of 1,000 that is then weighted according to an appropriate statistical technique to produce a sample that we believe to be producing nationally representative results, even then your margin of error is usually plus or minus 3%. So anything plus or minus, right, that's a pretty big window, especially when you're looking at results that are showing you basically a tie. It doesn't really tell you very much about where we are, except that things seem to be pretty close. The other thing I'd encourage you to remember is just in terms of basic statistics, and I'm sure a number of you in this room and maybe even some of you out there, right, have taken basic statistics classes and learned about the confidence interval. So this plus or minus 3%, this margin of error, is within the 95% confidence interval, which means that 5% of the time we would expect the results to occur simply by chance. Right? So any individual poll you want to approach with that in mind. The second thing that I'd like you to keep at the front of your mind when you're looking at individual poll results is that the most surprising poll results are also the most likely to be divergent. Right? Those are the polls that you really want to wait on and see how it fits into the average of polls, the poll of polls. So after the first presidential debate, when the president, by all accounts on the left and on the right, did not perform up to hopes and expectations, and Governor Romney seemed to have a fairly strong performance, Pew, which polls regularly, had a new poll come out that showed Governor Romney up 4% nationwide. And across the pages of the Huffington Post, a huge banner, Pew, Romney up 4, right? Maybe, right? We have to wait and see. And so you would want to then fold that into the polling data, and people have done that, and it's less clear what sort of a bounce Romney got. Might only be half that size, and this is still, right, we are doing this science as this election is unfolding, so we have to just try to keep up with things. But it's not clear right now that that swung in the direction to the magnitude that individual Pew poll would have said. Okay. So I brought up debates. That leads to the question, do the debates actually matter? And the debate we had last night, where the president came out and performed much more strongly, was much more aggressive, will that then shift the momentum in the campaign? And not just shift the momentum by affecting the spirits of the campaigns and the party faithful, but actually moving votes. So two standards when you're asking the question, do the debates matter? First, you want to think, do they actually move public opinion, and by how much? And then you could hold that question to an even higher standard to say you have an effect, and that is, does it actually affect the outcome of the election? Okay. So let's look at some historical polling data that tries to measure whether debates actually matter. I'm sorry, this is a little maybe hard for you to see, and especially those of you out there. I'll try to walk through this, not rely on the chart to do the work here. So this table is courtesy of social scientist Thomas Holbrook, and he went and looked at polling data, polls of polls, in the 6 days prior to the first presidential debate in the campaign season, and the day of that presidential debate, so the week leading up to, and then the week following the final presidential debate in that campaign season. And you can see here that the total change, this last column, you certainly would have a hard time making a case that across elections, debates have mattered in the outcome. So in 1988, there were 2 debates. The total change during the debate period was 2.5% in favor of the incumbent party candidate. So in 1988, that is, of course, George H.W. Bush running for the presidency as the incumbent's party candidate. And so in this pre- and post-debate period, there's a change in his favor of 2.5%, right? Not big. One might say not something you'd want to hang your hat on in terms of statistical certainty. And this is not a large effect. And he was favored to win that election anyway. So in terms of the statistical models, which I'll talk about in just a minute. So it's hard to make the case for that. In 1992, the total change during the debate period is only 0.5%. 1996, Clinton is running for re-election, and he actually emerges from that debate period worse off, at least according to this data, down 1.5 points. Still goes on to be re-elected, of course. The election in which we might say, based on this data, that the debates actually had an effect is 2000, when the incumbent party's candidate, Al Gore, running to succeed Bill Clinton, he is down 3.5% after these 3 debates. Of course, this is a long period of time. And then that leaves us with the question, is that change that we've experienced over that time due to the debate performances? And you might remember in this room, and you might remember out there, that Al Gore was hammered hard for being very dismissive during those debates, that he sighed, that he eye-rolled, and did not come off as somebody that you want to have a beer with, is the classic line. George W. Bush was the guy you wanted to have a beer with. Al Gore was a snooty Ivy Leaguer, and that's the story people tell about these debates. But a lot of uncertainty surrounding the actual effect of the debates here. In 2004, we have a roughly negative 2% change away from George W. Bush, who is reelected. And then in 2008, you have about 2% away from John McCain. But John McCain was already facing strong headwinds because of the financial crisis. So that the models were not predicting that he was going to win anyway. So our outcome is consistent with what our prior expectations were before we even had the debates. I've been mentioning these models. What do I mean when I talk about models of the election and election outcomes? There is a cottage industry among social scientists, both political scientists and some economists, in predicting election outcomes. And these predictions are usually made based on economic data and then sometimes measures of foreign commitments. So boots on the ground, casualties are sometimes added into these models. And then there's difference in how the health of the economy is measured. Some of the best predictions do not rely on the unemployment rate or the change in GDP in the quarters prior to the election or inflation, although those predict quite well. But personal disposable income, so pocketbook voting, is what predicts best. And so with these models, with varying degrees of success, we can do a decent job predicting election outcomes and have a sense of where we think that we should be. This election, the models differ. There are some that say that President Obama will lose the election based on the fundamentals, is what they're called. But most of the models point to an Obama victory. And most of the models point to a very close race, essentially the race that the real clear average is showing us that we're in the middle of right now, at the end of this period when voters are finally turning their attention to the election. And interestingly, these models tend to do just as well predicting the election outcome using April economic data as they do November economic data, which tells us something interesting about voter decision making. It also raises a lot of questions too. Now, when we talk about the economy and the fundamentals really driving election outcomes, political scientists are often painted as saying, well, that means that campaigns don't matter. And to speak on behalf of my profession, that is not actually an accurate characterization of our position. It's not that campaigns don't matter, but that at the very least, campaigns help communicate to voters the state of play. They tell them what the state of the economy is, right? It helps them tune into that. But that means that the in the trenches battles, the things that we all probably follow daily in the news and enjoy reading if you're a political junkie, these things don't matter to most voters. And it's not just that they don't matter, they're not even on their radar at all. Some colleagues here at Hoover, also in the political science department, Mo Fiorina and David Brady and I, have been conducting a weekly poll of Americans through YouGov, the YouGov Economist poll. They partner with The Economist magazine each week to conduct this poll, and they allow us to add some questions each week. And that is thanks to Doug Rivers, who's the chairman of YouGov, and also, well, actually now he's the chief innovations officer, and he is a senior fellow here at Hoover and a professor in the political science department. And so the four of us working together have been attempting to get measures of campaign attention. So I can stand up here and say to you, people don't pay attention to this stuff. Right? We have that sense, but what do we actually see when we ask people what they know about? So each week, we've been looking at what's happened in the campaign, what people have considered the big dust-up, the big gaffe, and then we go out and on the internet, we ask in a way based on social science research methodology, what did you know about this? Right. And it is striking what people don't know about what happened in the campaign. Shouldn't be surprising. As I said, people have other things to pay attention to, but it really is remarkable the lack of penetration of most events in the campaign. I would say that the high watermark was when the president came out in favor of gay marriage. That, in the aggregate, among all respondents, had an awareness rate. People answered the question correctly when we asked about what the president had said on a certain point. 80% were able to do that. And we don't ask, this happened, did you hear about it? We ask essentially a quiz. And people, for the most part, must be being remarkably honest about things because they're asked about, and I'll show you some examples here in a second, but our approach is to ask them about something about this happened, the following, which of the following was said or who did this, and then to provide them with 3 possible options, one of which is the correct choice, and then to give them a 4th option, which is I haven't heard about the controversy, or I didn't hear about the statement. We never force respondents to say, I don't know. We give them essentially I haven't gotten around to hear about that yet. So let me give you a couple of examples of this. So after the Republican National Convention in Florida, we followed up with a question trying to see what level of attention people had paid to one of the key themes of the Republican National Convention, which was to return to what some people considered a misstatement on the president's part, a gaffe, whatever you want to call it, or an opportunity for the Republicans at the very least, when he had said that if you've got a business, you didn't build that, right? Of course, it was in a context, right? But that was a phrase in what he said. The Republicans in the Romney campaign then picked up on that, ran with it prior to the convention, and then at the convention also hammered hard on that. So we asked, Republicans were criticizing President Obama for a statement he had made in a speech last month. That statement is which of the following? And one of the responses was, if you've got a business, you didn't build that. And 56%, half of Americans, were able to identify that. Now, the other 44% do not spread themselves across, in any significant way, the incorrect options. Most of them drop into the I didn't hear about that. And you only really get 2 or 3, sometimes 4% of people choosing one of the other options. So I would say that this might be an overestimate of the percentage of people that had heard about this by maybe 3 or 4%. So for the most part, I think we are getting a fairly good measure of the level of attention that people have paid to these outcomes. We then in the subgroups see some interesting patterns as well. We see variation across party ID. So Democrats, 42%, were able to identify the correct response here. Republicans, 68%, and Independents, 69%. And that tends to follow the theory, not really a well-formed theory at this point, but at least the conjecture that Republicans were the ones tuning in and watching that convention, and Independents were the ones tuning in and watching the convention, and Democrats, for the most part, know who their guy is. They're not out gathering information about who they're going to vote for during the Republican National Convention, and therefore they were not aware of what was going on during the Republican National Convention. We also see some patterns consistently from week to week in every question in a gender gap on attention. Men are always more likely to choose the correct answer. They always do choose the correct answer at a higher rate than women do. And as we've seen in the last few weeks, because we've been doing this since March, as we've seen in the last few weeks, this uptick in attention, the number of, as measured by the number of people able to identify what was actually said, that is being driven mostly by men tuning in and getting the answer right, and that gender gap in attention is actually growing. And while it used to be on average, I'd say 10 points, sometimes 15 points, we're now talking usually 18 points, sometimes as high as 25 points. Another example, I'm sorry, this one is not as pretty because I just put it together before I came down here. We asked a question 2 weeks ago about what I call the rolling calamity, because that's what Wall Street Journal columnist Peggy Noonan called it, and that was the disarray in the Romney campaign several weeks ago, before the first presidential debate. And Peggy Noonan was not the only conservative commentator piling on to the Romney campaign. And of course said this is the end of the Romney campaign, right? In order to have any shot at winning, Romney's going to need a complete overhaul. There were calls to bring in James Baker. There was a sense of doom. People were wondering if you needed to pay attention to where Karl Rove was placing his money. If he was moving his money down to down ballot races, this would be a sign that he thought that the presidential race was over. I mean, there was a real, as I would guess a number of you had followed, right, a sense of impending doom in terms of those who felt strongly that President Romney should win the White House. So how many people actually knew all of that chatter was going on? And it turns out that in the aggregate, you had, well, sorry, the question I should give you is, over the last 2 weeks, many conservative commentators in the media have been criticizing which of the following. And their choices were Republican members of Congress, evangelical religious leaders, or Mitt Romney's presidential campaign. And in total, 52% of respondents knew that conservative commentators had been criticizing the Romney campaign, and then here you have 3.5% identified the other options. And then most other people who didn't get it right, 40% said, no, I didn't hear about this. So that's an indication, right, of the level of attention that people are paying to these in the trenches, ground game, right, horse race elements of the campaign. And that's one of the reasons, aside from just predictive accuracy, that we have faith that elections are decided primarily based on the fundamentals of the economy and foreign policy and international engagement. All right. Oh, sorry, I thought there was a question over there. A few final things that I want to talk about, and then I am looking forward to taking your questions. So the path to 270, we have this polling. Much of it is national. But, of course, the presidential race is not won by a national vote or a national poll. It's won through the states, through the Electoral College. So what are some of the things that we want to be looking for as we head into this last phase of the presidential campaign, thinking about how this is going to be decided within the individual states? I expect that we will know who the winner is fairly early on in the evening, because as polling closes on the East Coast, we're going to be provided with some critical information about how you get to that 270. So in the case of Romney, he must win Florida. There is no reasonable math in the path to 270 to a victory in the Electoral College that does not include Florida and its 29 electoral votes. So if Florida is called for Obama at any point in the evening, you will know that the president has won. And let's flip to Florida first here. So this is the real clear average on Florida, Romney versus Obama. And right now, Romney is up in the poll of polls 2.5 percentage points. Now, this is, of course, in the margin of error. The margin of error would be 3% here. So we are getting at a statistical dead heat in Florida. And this way, what's going on in Florida is a good reflection of what's going on nationally. Governor Romney faces a number of challenges in Florida related to demographic shifts. Of course, how the campaigns make their cases about Medicare, and plans for changing that will matter a great deal in a state in which you have a higher than standard percentage of retired voters who are currently on Medicare or close to Medicare eligibility age. So that's going to be something to follow closely and something you should have on your radar in these last weeks and certainly on election night as well. Romney must win Florida, and he really should win Ohio. And I'll give the standard cliches before I launch into the specific details, right, that as goes Ohio, there goes the nation. No Republican president has ever won the presidency without winning Ohio. Romney could win the presidency without winning Ohio. But if he wins Florida, keeping himself in the game, and loses Ohio, he then has to run the table on 6 other battleground states. He must win Nevada, Colorado, Iowa, North Carolina, Virginia, and New Hampshire. Right. So again, you will know as we have polls close on the East Coast, right, that if he has not won North Carolina and Virginia, his probability of winning the presidency is going down, because then that puts him, right, at risk of not winning if he then also doesn't pick up Ohio. So these are things to keep in mind. The president has many more paths to victory. His big hurdle is Virginia. If he doesn't win Virginia, then he has to run the table on a slew of battleground states, but it, again, doesn't knock him out completely. There is no keystone state for Obama, for the president, the way there is for Mitt Romney. All right, I think I'll conclude my comments there, because I think I'm almost at a half an hour, and open up to questions here in the room and out there.
Well, I can start. I had a question about the emerging market for political futures and how that's really changing up the way that polling is done in a national election. Are we gaining any new knowledge from crowdsourcing, and is crowdsourcing voting futures providing either putting pollsters out of business or providing like helpful information?
Right. that's a great question, one in which we don't have a lot of data at this point. And as my esteemed colleague David Brady says, unless I have data, I can't think. So anything I'm saying at this point is purely speculation. What is happening with the futures trading market is happening simultaneously with a fundamental change in survey research. And the challenges out there right now to conventional telephone polling right? So how many of you have a landline? Okay, right, a few hands, right? Most people now, right, new generations have cell phones, right? And so survey researchers are struggling to figure out ways to incorporate cell phone samples, cell phone only samples, into their populations. They're doing it, right? They're trying to overcome these hurdles in thoughtful ways, but the reality is they have not solved this problem. Internet polling is then seen as a possible solution to these problems, a way to get representative samples, and they're making great progress. The YouGov polling firm that Doug Rivers here heads up their survey research team, he has developed a statistical model and a method of weighting, a methodology that is producing very accurate results. And not just in terms of being in line with the other polls, but actually giving you a measure that is then reflected in what happens in political reality. So if you look at the 2010 midterm elections, and you look at the lineup of reputable polling firms, and actually, I don't have the slide here with me, but you can line them up off the actual outcome, the percentage voting Republican nationwide, and it's YouGov that is actually right on the line, that has produced the most accurate result. So we are responding to this. That said, and that is all the lead up to say that I think that these trading markets are another way, right, to gather information from individuals to try to overcome the hurdles we have in just going out and getting representative samples in the way we used to, because that's not working anymore. So I would expect that people are going to be paying a lot of attention, because we have these other problems out there, in gathering data that is giving us accurate estimates.
Hi. Yeah, I'm slightly new to the idea of polling at all. And so I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about why we bother polling at all. As in, it seems to me that the people who might benefit most in this would be, say, businesses or something who are trying to make a political prediction. Okay. But what seems to be really clear is that, one, the politicians don't really talk about their policies in any great detail, and two, a lot of these polling data seems to be very suspect and difficult to go, and there's a lot of error. If I'm a big businessman, why would I bother actually paying that much attention to polls? Like, whose benefit is polling? Is it just a hobbyist sort of thing to do?
For maybe the way to answer it is this, and you can come back at me for a different answer. The media gives people, by and large, what they want to read. For all our complaints about the media, we are complaining about ourselves. And we want to follow the horse race. We want to know. We want to digest these individual poll results. We don't just want to know what the score of the Giants playoff game is. We want to watch the Giants playoff game. Right? And so that is, I think, a big driver of why you have this constant attention to the latest Pew poll out there. Do you want to ask a follow-up? Was that?
No, I mean, that makes sense.
Okay.
Yeah, I guess my question's kind of in the same line of, like, I don't even know what is the meaning of a poll? Like, I'm just skeptical that, like, significant amounts of American voters are day-to-day switching between whether they want more government in their life or whether they want, like, more libertarian, or like they're constantly like having a philosophical crisis every second. And I would think that more like the polls would reflect that more people that already like Obama are more willing to express that they like Obama, or more people who were already like Romney are actually now going to go out and vote. But I just find it like hard to believe that the nation's really constantly every day switching back and forth between who it likes.
I think you're correct in that assessment. So as a social scientist, my colleagues and I aren't interested in following the horse race. We are not really that interested in the top lines about is Obama up, is Romney up. We'll do the post-mortem on the election and how it was decided after the election when we have the good data. But we are students of politics, and it's interesting to see how people make their decisions and how those decisions develop over time. And by surveying people, not just about their vote choice, right, but their characteristics as individuals, their issue positions, we can try to do some real analysis about why the electorate is holding the positions that it is and is favoring the candidates that it is. And we don't want to just look at any individual poll, but we want to try to aggregate and get a sense of, over time, over any reasonable amount of time that we can segment with all the different forces affecting people's opinions, how is it that people behave politically?
So would you say that there's a time period where once you get within this time period, the polling serves more of an entertainment value? Like it's not really scientific to look at the change over a day or a week. Like there's like from a political science perspective, like is there like a minimum time period that you have to look at?
So you can often get very interesting and valuable knowledge from a cross-section, from one poll. If the sample is large enough and you have some sort of confidence in the reliability of the estimates, and then you're not parsing the data, you're not, phrase we use is you're asking too much of the data. You're saying, I want to know what women who make over $100,000 a year and are college educated think about the president on this particular issue, but you're only using a sample of 1,000. That's not giving you very many people to look at. But we do want to take a look as much as we can, right, and try to understand. We don't want to confine ourselves to saying, oh, we have to have a month's worth of data to say anything.
Or what I'm saying is when does change become significant, like the change between two time periods? Like you could sample the nation at one point, but when could you say like there was significant change from the last poll?
Well, some people would answer that question by saying that if the next time you get a poll result, that the estimates are outside the margin of error, right? So if you had Obama and Romney tied, and then you have the president up 10 points, some people would say, okay, well, then that's enough to say something. Whereas most social scientists would say, well, actually, you want to see that replicated a lot of places by a lot of polling firms, and then you might be able to say that there was a shift.
Okay.
Yeah, Bill?
10%.
It seems to me there's all sorts of fascinating things that polling is going to give you, other than just the horse race, although that's the obvious thing, because ultimately there is a given date when the people have to finish voting, and so the candidates are all making strategic decisions. But look at what happened with women in the last few weeks. Women have possibly shifted to being much more friendly to Romney than they were before. Look at what have happened to libertarian voters. So these are the 15 to 20% of the electorate that are, they want low taxes, they want a deregulated economy, they also don't think there should be government prescriptiveness on social issues. So these people voted for Obama in 2008, but it looks, from the polling data, like they're voting for Governor Romney this time. So there's all sorts of fascinating things like this that are happening with the data that if you didn't have these polls going on, you wouldn't know.
I agree with you, Bill, and the cross-section, as I said, can tell you interesting things if you're using it in a responsible way. And the changes that, as you say, possibly might be occurring, you're right, these are things that we would want to know, especially since they might have an outcome.
What about evangelical Christians and a Mormon president? This is very important to campaign.
Yes, and as students of political behavior, we want to know these things. Of course, we have to think about the level of confidence that we can have, even in a poll of polls over a week. So if you think about any given poll, and I know a lot of these polls that have talked about the shift among women toward Governor Romney have gotten a lot of attention. So if the top line result is that it's 3% margin of error, top line means that you've only cut the data one way. You're saying who wants Romney, who wants Obama. Right, margin of error on that is plus or minus 3%. Once you cut again, your margin of error, as a leading statistician who writes for a blog called themonkeykage.org said, and I encourage you to follow it. It's a really great blog in which they have a number of contributors and they're trying to bring political science to the public debate and to inform these discussions. He wouldn't even dare to put a number on how big the margin of error is once you do that additional cut, right? I mean, he could, but he just said, listen, it's large, right? And so that's what makes it, you're right, very worthwhile to do, right? Important to do. We don't want to sit on the sidelines while what we study is actually happening, but it's hard to come to the table and say, we know that this is a real change. We can come and say, based on this data, this is our estimate, and we have a confidence interval around that, and do your best, even if it's just in qualitative language, to say what you think that confidence interval is.
Can I just follow up on that? Yeah, so my question leading on from this, and I don't want to be flippant, but it's still that this still is in the domain of observers who care because it's their job, because they're academics, or they're just interested in it. But there doesn't seem to be any other tangible gain from actually doing the polling, right? This is still part of the horse race. It's just that the people betting on it are academics rather than just people in the media.
Well, so
what's the difference?
Maybe my answer to that, my answer to that is this, that in a democracy, I think the people deserve to know, or they should be given the opportunity to know where the demo stands at any given point in time during the process in which we are choosing our elected representatives, right? That is not a social science answer. That is a normative political theory answer, but that would be my thought on why it's worth doing, right? I want it done responsibly, but I think it's worth doing, right?
So you think it makes democracy better? Is that what you're saying?
Depends on how you do it, right? And Mackie, you had some thoughts on this. Please share. My colleague, Mackie Raymond.
Hi, sorry I'm late. My
A
plane
political
landed late.
scientist, by the way.
Yeah, thanks for the pizza, too. That was great. So I actually wanted to take the conversation in a slightly different direction, if everybody's game with this. I actually wonder about the recursive behavior of polling and the positions of the candidates. And I wondered if, in the vast history of which you have excellent command, there are any, really dirty stories around how candidates end up whiplashing because of the polling stuff.
It seems like you might have a story in mind. Would you like to tell it?
I actually don't, but I was pretty sure you might.
Whiplashing because of the polling. This whole politicians don't pander argument is the name of a book, for those of you who are outside the field, about how politicians, their argument is politicians are not responsive to the polls. I mean, so I am, because of the fact that there is an argument in the discipline about this, I am kind of hesitant to come out and say, I can provide you with this anecdote, because I'd rather have it on the terms of the disciplinary debate, and I will freely admit that is not something that I'm not in the middle of that debate. So I guess.
So I'm probably older than everyone in the room, so maybe I can offer one. Okay, you win. At the end of the Carter administration, when he was standing for re-election, there was a period for about 6 weeks before the last 2 weeks of the election, where he had remarkable changes of position.
Okay.
And there was some speculation at that time that somebody was paying too much attention to positions in the poll, the top lines of the polls. And what I do remember particularly was that he had an entire campaign travel agenda itinerary that he completely bailed on in the last month.
Okay.
And so you have to sort of wonder, these things are set up so far in advance.
Yes.
what drove that dramatic change in behavior?
Right, possibly the polls. Yeah.
Didn't work out so well,
Right.
but still.
Right. The normative questions that raises, though, are not necessarily ones that lead to a condemnation of politicians being responsive to polls, though, right? Because again, it depends on how they respond. Because if you believe in a responsive model of democracy, then you would want your elected officials figuring out what people wanted. But if you see more of a responsible version of democracy in which politicians do what they think is in the best interest of the country, and then the voters hold them responsible, then that's a different governing philosophy.
That's exactly right. It's exactly what the question is which way does the arrow point?
Yeah.
Right, and so does the politician establish positions sort of a priori, and polling is merely an opportunity to get feedback on what people think about that,
Right.
or does polling become essentially a market research tool that allows you to fine-tune, right? And
Right. It's certainly not it's an important empirical question, one that is not settled in the discipline. And that empirical question is accompanied by normative questions about delegates and trustees, proper role of representatives, what we see as our governing model.
I think that there's a third player when you're talking about the recursive nature of polling, and that is voters. So I guess pushing back on what you were saying, I wonder how powerful it is for or polling results being pushed out to the media in terms of affecting voter behavior. Like how would voters respond to polls being published in the media if you say that in the media we read what we want to hear? And then a third dimension of that is thinking about how to what extent biased and unethical polls, unofficial polls in the media affect voting behavior, and how real polling data can compete with that. Specifically, given the fact that the news cycle is so much shorter, how can we create responsible polls, get them out to the media, and then how does that affect voting behavior?
Yeah, good questions, Lisa. So the first one, remind me again, was
About the recursive nature of polling
recursive,
and voters.
Okay, so what effect that has, right? And what came to mind when you asked that was these concerns that you hear about turnout, that polls will depress turnout, that if people think that the president is going to walk away with this, as people were speculating during the rolling calamity period of the Romney campaign, the president's up by so much that Democratic voters won't turn out, and so this actually hurts him. And we just don't know, right? People have studied this, but just because people have done studies doesn't mean that we have answered the question to any sort of satisfaction. That is part of the process, right? Doing the studies, building the body of knowledge, improving on that. But I can't give you a good, certain answer that we know that actually happens, right? People have theories that it might, but whether it does, we don't know. And then the question of how to cut through the clutter. If I knew the answer to that, I would be doing quite well for myself. It's a challenge like anything. It's the challenge for the news and analysis that doesn't have poll numbers in it. How do you get that real information through the garbage that's out there? And there is a concern that people watch, let's pick on Fox News, because people do, right? People watch Fox News, and then they submit their answer to the Fox News poll, and they look at the Fox News poll, and they're like, oh, 85% of Americans think that Governor Romney should win, and 70% of them think that he will. And some people have said, this is bad for America, basically, is the line. But the social science on this is mixed at this point about how polarized our media consumption actually is, and what sort of effect that eventually has on voter behavior. Some studies say that it is polarized and it is furthering polarization, and other people say there's not. Of course, there are a fair number of distinguished scholars, including our own Mo Furina here at Hoover and in the Stanford Political Science Department, who argue that the electorate itself is not polarized, and a lot of what we get agitated about is a small group on the extremes, basically 10% on either side, and so you have to keep these other factors in mind when you're getting worried about these things, and then also when you're thinking about what the potential solution to if you think it's a problem, actually is.
Okay, how about last question?
Internet polls. I'm just curious how they work, because if I were going to do a telephone poll of Virginia, I would target Fairfax County, Norfolk, and I could geographically target, I could choose my demographics. I have U.S. Census data. How do they choose people for Economist YouGov online poll and know that it's representative of the areas they want? For a telephone, it's easy to know you're calling a number at this house. How do I know that this guy online's like, I live in Fairfax County? Like, how do you authenticate?
Yeah. So this is a great question. So this is not an internet survey where anyone can just click. Like somebody can send you the web link and you just submit your opinion. This is part of what they call their polling point panel. And they have recruited individuals across the United States into this panel, and they then can actually have some sense that they have reliable information on them, right? They have information about their IP address. They can confirm that they are actually located in Fairfax, Virginia. So this is not something that is done just willy-nilly. I should clarify that the web or the internet is not a sampling methodology. It is a mode of interviewing, and then there's a whole statistical methodology and sampling methodology that goes along with your mode of interviewing. And you have your polling point panel, and that is recruited by first going out and saying, what do we think the population of people that I want to know their opinion on, right? So Americans, what do we think it actually looks like? And they use large, very well-respected data sets. They're using the American Community Survey, which is done by the census. They say, okay, this is what we think Americans look like, and then they match the people that they've recruited into their sample to that. And in the individual sample, in 1,000 people, they then do have to use a method of statistical weighting to make that even closer to what they consider to be representative of that population out there that they have statistical information about. And many polls, including telephone polls, engage in weighting. So this is not something that's just done on the internet, and it's something that, when done by a respected survey researcher and statistician like Doug Rivers, right, is done thoughtfully and is producing good results. How do they contact the person? So they do.
Is the person a subscriber to The Economist?
Or? No. I mean, so the YouGov makes their money doing survey research for companies, doing market research, and so they're not just doing this for the Economist. Although that's a good question because that's all I mentioned. So they have. I know we need to wrap up here soon, right? So maybe we can talk about this offline.
Okay. Thank you all for coming out. If you're really interested in pulling data and a little bit more about Tammy Frisby's research, you can take Poli-Sci 2, right, which is offered next quarter in the winter, which is like the introductory course for public policy, and also taught with Mo Fiorina, who was mentioned.
Mo is taking the year off.
Mo's
but yes,
taking the year
Introduction to American Politics, and then in the spring, Introduction to Public Policy Making.
Great.
Can I just ask a quick question? Tammy, for all the YouGov stuff that you guys are doing right now, can we access that just on the YouGov website, or is it best to go through The Economist, just in case someone here wants to
Right.
track some of that?
Yeah, I would recommend, you can certainly go to yougov.com, and it's the word yougov.com. That will lead you to the company website, which also contains the market research and some of the other ways in which they're trying to use social media. If you want to access the Economist polls directly, I would encourage you to Google YouGov Economist, and that'll lead you right there.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
For more, please visit us at stanford.edu.